Hello! This is a Cosmologies video review covering Platonism, perspective geometry, and Renaissance cosmology. One useful way to consider various theories of cosmology is to ask, what are the limits of what is understood in that system, and what, if anything, might exist beyond that understanding? In modern science, this question applies equally to the micro and the macro realm. We have a sound understanding of physical interactions down to a millionth of a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a centimeter, and have calculated the outer edges of the observed universe to 46.5 billion light years. As scientists have reached closer and closer to these thresholds of understanding, they have left the embodied sensory realm of human experience further and further behind. In its place, they have turned to mathematics, whether it's the equations behind Einstein's general relativity or the abstract mathematical formalism used to describe the quantum realm. For many physicists, mathematics isn't merely a tool for understanding the fundamentals of reality. For them, the mathematical laws are themselves the basic stuff of the universe, existing at a fundamental level even before matter. Math becomes a kind of transcendent truth, a deification of the abstract that may be based on cutting-edge contemporary theory, but is also a philosophical echo of an idea that goes back more than 2,000 years. In ancient Greece, Plato proposed a system that, throughout Western history, turns out to be surprisingly resilient. Plato's cosmos begins with his theory of forms, a quasi-spiritual realm that is abstract, perfect, unchanging. Platonic forms are the non-physical essences of all things. A Platonic form is aspatial, which means it's transcendent to space, and atemporal, meaning transcendent to time itself. Our material physical world is an imperfect representation of the realm of forms. All the things that we know, chairs, trees, dogs, are mere imitations of these transcendent forms. Human beings can imagine perfect abstract forms, but we are limited in our imperfect perceptions, and we inhabit a world that is in constant flux, seemingly irregular and chaotic. Thus, the world as we know it is a mere shadow of the perfect realm of forms. Following Plato, Euclid devised his elaborate Elements, an all-encompassing mathematical system that laid out an entire world of intricate, interconnected, absolute truth. The transitory, earthbound world was seen as an imperfect artifact of that perfect world, the world described by mathematics. Plato's absolute, perfect, unchanging realm of forms was understood by Euclid as something attainable in our world through mathematics. In the Renaissance, there was a revival of interest in Greco-Roman classical antiquity, and Platonism was rediscovered and became extremely influential. Plato's concept of eternal, unchanging forms beyond the grasp of our limited perception dovetailed nicely with Christian doctrine, in which humans were born into sin, inhabiting a corrupt, earthbound world and seeking redemption in the perfection of the heavenly kingdom of God. Along with Platonism came Euclid, who proposed a realm of pure geometry, a world that could, in theory, be perfectly and precisely understood. In this construct, the prime mover of this geometric universe was God, as if the master architect of the cosmos was also a master mathematician. Because the heavens were the realm of the divine, forms and motions of planets and stars and other heavenly bodies must be harmonious, crystalline manifestations of God's perfection. A circle was considered the most divine shape, perfectly symmetrical, The ring, a totality of points equidistant from a center point. The celestial realm was imagined as an all-encompassing dome, populated by stars and planets that were themselves precisely spherical with seemingly circular orbits. The fact that planets can have a retrograde phase of orbit was actually an ongoing puzzle for astronomers in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. In keeping with Plato and Euclid, a sphere could be observed in the heavens and a circle could be calculated in a planet's orbit, but perfect circles don't exist in the imperfect earthbound realm, except as a human construct in art. So 16 centuries after Euclid, the European artists who developed linear perspective discovered that Euclidean geometry could be made manifest in the so-called fallen world. There were hints of a connection, intriguing relationships between the pure forms of geometry that exist on a higher plane and measurable, actionable aspects of our world. The development of perspective illusionism in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance made these connections concrete and material in paintings, frescoes, and architecture. The artists of this era discovered that they could exploit Euclid's mathematics to manufacture a direct, sensory experiential conduit to a cosmic plane of existence. Churchgoers could temporarily experience an out-of-body transcendence, entering a portal into the kingdom of God. Because this passage was facilitated by Euclidean geometry, it seemed unquestionable that at some fundamental level the universe was purely mathematic, Platonic. But there was a hitch. For the illusion of perspective trompe l'oeil to work, an individual had to stand on a mark on a church floor and direct his or her gaze to a specific area of the two-dimensional surface. This meant that the priest was no longer the intermediary, the broker between the supplicant and God. The churchgoer controlled his or her experience, could decide where and when to look at the fresco. He or she dictated the circumstances of transcendence. The artist, in creating an image through forced perspective, could organize and construct a world in supremely rational detail. And in much the same way, a viewer can stand in front of this image and perceptually organize and comprehend that same world, and in both cases, without the intervention of the church. Jose Arguelles, quoted by Leonard Shlain in his book Art and Physics, writes, "In the mechanical, rigidly perspectival visual system of the post-Renaissance West, the center is in the individual ego outside the window frame, and no longer within the work of art itself. This amounts to saying that there is no longer any sacred center, for visual art no longer functions as a divine symbol, but simply as the picture of an imaginary world." So this shifting of perspective from the church to the individual was one of many examples of the conflict between the secular and the divine that began to define the early modern period following the Renaissance and would eventually lead to the Enlightenment. With the advent of Renaissance humanism, the focus began to shift from God to the individual imbued with his or her own unique perspective. European cosmology saw an increasing dominance of scientific rationalism. Copernicus showed that the known universe was heliocentric. Kepler calculated that planets have imperfect, elliptical, not circular orbits. Galileo observed a barren, rocky moon, much like the deserts of Earth. And Descartes developed a physics grounded in materialism, in which everything can be explained as geometrically extended stuff. To the church, these were dangerous ideas because they begin to reveal in ever-increasing detail the hidden processes of matter and motion in the world. In the cosmos of Christianity, God made matter and dictated how it moved. This doctrine required submission to the priestly caste to be understood. Science said that humans can measure, calculate, and predict the movement of heavens.